Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday afternoon. I'm Summer Surface. I'm the Assistant Director of CAP, and you are joining us for our third of 4 webinars focused on teaching English language learners in both ESL classes and English classes. Today, we're talking about teaching complicated issues in the beginning ESL classroom. We have Lawson from Palomar College, and we have Guillermo Colls from Cuyamaca joining us today. I am recording this, and the recording, as well as all materials, will be up on the CAP publications page as soon as the Zoom recording is available. Probably I will get them up early next week, so that will be available to you and any of your colleagues who could not join us today. I will also be sending out a survey after the webinar, so you guys can give us feedback. In terms of how we'll run this today, I am going to leave the chat open so that you guys can use the chat to share ideas or react to things that are being presented or share feedback. And then we will have Q&A time at the end, and we'll use the chat for that as well. So just go ahead and hold off on your questions until we move into the Q&A portion so they don't get lost in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lawrence. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's nice to have you here. Just to start, beginning level ESL may not always mean beginning level content. Obviously, I think a lot of us know that. You might have students in your class who have PhDs. My wife, for example, teaches a healthcare careers course, and she has all medical doctors from different countries in her class. And you'll have students dealing with complex issues in life in your class. And we know from research and experience that adult learners want to be treated as whole people and capable people. And this presentation shows our approaches to that within our classrooms. Just to introduce ourselves first, if I can move to that part of the slide. Excuse me. There we go. My name is Lawrence Hamilton Lawson. I do teach at Palomar College. I've been a community college professor for 11 years. In fact, my first day at work was Obama's inauguration day, so it's always a memorable day for me. My beginning ESL courses have been from true beginner to high beginner. And students in those classes have come from Mexico, Thailand, Honduras, Japan, Guatemala, Ukraine, Brazil, the United States, and other countries. And they've had a broad range of educational backgrounds, from having completed only 3rd grade to having PhDs. And over here is my partner in crime.
I am Guillermo Colls. I teach at Cuyamaca College. I'm the chair of ESL there. I joined the California Acceleration Project Leadership in 2016. I was part of that in 2015. I did redesign the ESL program at Cuyamaca with the CAP-inspired acceleration principles before AB 705 came out, because we thought it definitely could apply. I went to San Diego State University, and the bottom fact, just for people's knowing, you know, I'm married, 1 daughter, 2 guinea pigs, the newest addition to the things. And with 5 people in the family, I'm currently number 5 in importance on the family priority list. So back to Lawrence.
Awesome. Well, we're going to start with this question. Why discuss complicated issues in the beginning ESL classroom? Normally, I would do a group warm-up in a class, since this is a webinar, or in a session. Since this is a webinar, that's a little more difficult, but I still want to give you an opportunity to type into the chat an answer to this question. Why discuss complicated issues in the beginning ESL classroom? Maybe just 30 seconds to a minute to type that into the chat. Because our students' lives are complicated, to engage students, reinforce critical thinking, encounter those issues in their personal lives, because they live here. Those are a lot of good answers. All right, thank you for those answers. And they can keep coming in as we move on. I will share some of my answers. I have some written on the screen here, and I'll share some different ones as well. But students have led and do lead complicated lives. And sometimes those complications intrude on their lives even more than they would want, or we would want. And they may need linguistic support to manage those issues. For example, in one semester in my course, we had 2 jury summonses that took everyone's attention, and we used some of that content to talk about the skills that was part of our course outline of record. Another semester, we had 3 parking tickets, and that was a really big topic of conversation that we needed to address for our students who needed that support. In 2010, there were census requests we went over, and then in 2017, there were ICE raids happening in northern San Diego County and across Southern California, and that was the topic du jour. Of course, we want to push back against the idea that an issue is too complex because the language is too complex for beginning level students. They are complex students. They have complex lives and complex emotions, and we should treat them like that. Our course outline of records, they really lay out the skills that we need to cover in a course, but sometimes real world content can or should become classroom content to practice those skills. And I would just emphasize depending on student need and interest. So doing a needs assessment would be useful to kind of gauge student interest in some of those more complicated or difficult topics. The other thing to mention is that these complicated topics provoke all sorts of feelings and reactions in students, of course, but also the same is true of instructors. I coordinated a program at Palomar College during the time when this was happening, and we had discussions about comfort with the complicated topic that I'm going to address today. In 2017, during a period of increased immigration enforcement in North San Diego County, our site received what to do when ICE comes to your house information cards in English and Spanish, and we were asked by a local immigrant rights group to pass it out to students. Felt like good information. If ICE comes, here's what to do, here's how to react. We needed to get the material approved before we could provide it to students, but when we did get it approved, we had to decide what to do. So providing the cards to students, again, they were just small red cards, which I don't have because they've been lost between moves and I can't go to my office and get them anyways in this climate. But they, on one side was English, on one side was Spanish, explaining their rights as immigrants and their right to do X, Y, or Z if ICE comes to your door. But it felt wrong to me giving those cards to students without reviewing the information with them. So I just discussed using the information as content in our classes with my colleagues. There was enthusiasm to do that. I think a lot of us were on the same page with that, but there was also a lot of discomfort. Some of the discomfort was revolved around questions like, is this our role to do? Is the language in this material too complicated? Is the Spanish information sufficient enough without us delving into it in the classroom in English? Or is this too political and we shouldn't bring it up? To address those concerns, we sat down as a faculty group and discussed some of these ideas that are on the screen here. For each teacher, what's right for them? What feels right? When does it feel right to bring this information into the classroom? How is the best way to do it in your class with your students? Because all student groups are different. I encouraged the teachers to do some reflective journaling, and I did myself, about why I felt uncomfortable about it, just to figure out where I was coming from before I moved on to what we should do as a group. Student free rights on the topic could be part of a needs assessment in terms of immigrant rights, having a free right discussion or a free right activity where students are kind of exploring what they know about that, what that means to them, might be useful. Something I instituted in my class was a safe motion, which might seem weird, but when we were doing some of the activities I'm going to talk to you about later, I just had students put their hand on their head if they were feeling uncomfortable. And that gave me a very easy way to know that we should pause or take a break or pivot or readdress something, just to make sure everyone felt comfortable with the material that we were covering. And then following up with faculty and students after the material. And then something that I did and I thought was pretty important was must, should, and could categorization. With these cards, there were things that we must do, things that we should do, and things that we could do. The thing that we must do, or we needed to do, was to provide the cards to the student. That was the baseline. The students needed the information. We were asked to give it to them. We decided to give it to them, so that was our goal. But we should discuss how to use the cards, discuss safety when using these cards, which again, these cards give the students in our class knowledge of their rights and what to do when ICE comes knocking at your door. And also to remind students to request an officer who speaks their language if that situation comes to pass. Also in the could category, we could discuss rights in a more deeper fashion. We could practice using language from the cards. There were some pretty tricky vocabulary words like warrant, for example, so we could bring that up in the classroom. And we could discuss valid types of warrants and kind of go into that direction. So there are lots of things that we could do. The other thing to mention is the political piece. For this difficult topic specifically, but probably others that are related, or maybe others that are not related. The idea that this thing is political, we shouldn't do it in the classroom might come up, which I think is fine, that everyone has a unique answer and an action based on their answer to that question of something being too political or political at all. And my response, I just want to share. My response is to act may be a political statement, and then to not act may also be a political statement. So if that notion resonates with you, acting is political or not acting is political, it's kind of up to you to decide which political statement you want to make. So leaving it up to people to make their own decisions with the baseline that these cards will be distributed to students. For me, we're here to support students. I would also say that we also, at our colleges and as individuals, we do profit off of our students. I have a job and my college has FTES because these students come to our classes for education. And in my view, for me personally, it's immoral to benefit from a system that relies on students, specifically vulnerable students, and not do what I can when they are looking to us for support. So that value sort of undergirds this entire presentation and the work that I'm going to share with you today. So the baseline content of these immigration rights cards is keyed to the skills from our course outline of records. And then we provided space for a difficult topic in our beginning and intermediate classrooms. That's what happened at my site, but this presentation is focused specifically on the beginning level. And we each did that within our own level of comfort and sensitivity to our student needs. What I'm going to show you is what I did. Other teachers did less and felt comfortable with that, and the students felt comfortable with that. And it's a spectrum, it's a range. So to give you a quick overview, this was a class from 2017 I taught for high beginning ESL. And what you see on the screen is part of the COR. So there's lots of skills we need to impart in this class. And I've highlighted a few that I thought were relevant for the unit I was going to do on immigrant rights. That's what I want to say about that. So then I move here to the actual unit that I taught, where I took those skills and I built them up using some of the content addressed in the immigrant rights cards. And again, you'll see some of that language a little bit later. I know it seems abstract, but I will show you that content in a bit. What you see here highlighted in blue is language from the COR that I just showed you. And then the non-highlighted language is the contextual content-based frames for those skills that I did for this unit. Because this is a webinar from the California Acceleration Project, I did want to talk about the accelerated principles at work in the classroom. I think, well, as Guillermo said, we're both graduates of the California Acceleration Project, and we've internalized the principles. And the principles typically are discussed in the context of pre-transfer level accelerated classes, but I find they can be adapted for beginning and intermediate language classes as well. And here I've highlighted pieces of the CAP accelerated principles that I find particularly relevant. So when we're talking about the principle of relevant thinking-oriented curriculum, for me, it's engaging with issues that matter. Just-in-time remediation, when you are dealing with a topic at the moment where the students have a need, helping them grapple with challenging tasks in the moment that they need it. Low-stakes collaborative practice with the most high-priority skills and content. Intentional support for students' affective needs. This is a big one for me in this lesson specifically, reducing students' fears. And then backwards design. You focus on the same skills as higher level courses. So in my high beginning course, I brought in some skills from the low intermediate course. And you're just kind of reaching upwards and pulling down to have high expectations and high support. So this screen specifically talks about how I connected these CAP principles to the work I was doing in my high beginning class. So when I talk about engaging with issues that matter, for students, the issue that mattered was immigration enforcement. Students either weren't coming to class because they were afraid of the rumors or the actual events of immigration enforcement happening around our site, grappling with challenging tasks, having to talk to police or immigration officers when they come to your door. And then so on. You can see the different topics that I keyed to the CAP principles in my class. Again, I'm going to keep saying this, but high expectations, high support. We talk about some complex tasks and topics in the beginning level course here, and it's not without high support. You don't just hand it to them and say, okay, go. We scaffold in our own ways, and everyone in this room scaffolds in their own way. So we do a lot of scaffolding to make sure that some of the higher level content is accessible to the students. So I am going to start by leading you through a sequence that I did for these students. It's a 3 kind of like a 3-lesson sequence. Some of these lessons took a day, some of them took a week, some of them took a couple of days. Timeframes differ, but I started scaffolding and building schema by talking about rights in the classroom, obviously tackling the notion of language of immigrant rights and interacting with immigration enforcement officers is super complicated. It's complicated for me. It's complicated for lots of people. So I obviously didn't start there. I started with the concept of what rights were, and specifically rights in the classroom. And I started by defining the word right for students in a very simple way that is not all-encompassing. I think it's more difficult to do that in an all-encompassing way. But I said, what you are allowed to do is what a right is. Obviously more complicated, but we started there. So I provided students with a language template, a conversation template to discuss rights in the classroom. And I typically use this structure, I, we, you, which is probably pretty familiar to everyone in the room. I model something in front of the class, some sort of linguistic frame or device or phrase. And then we practice it all together as a class so everyone feels supported and I can check understanding of the whole class. And then I ask students to do the task in groups and I circulate and offer support when it's needed. Some of that just-in-time remediation where I notice students are struggling with a certain aspect of this, then I step in. So at the beginning here, students talked about what rights they have in the classroom. They mentioned things like the right to raise their hand, the right to ask a question, the right to go to the bathroom, the right to take a break. And then I asked them at the end, when is it safe to exercise those rights? And in general, for this lesson, the students said, always. I always feel safe to ask a question. I always feel safe to go to the bathroom. I always feel safe to, come and get an education. So it was a fairly low stakes environment to start talking about rights. And that's, low stakes practice is part of one of those CAP principles that are really important for all of our lessons, but also this activity that I did specifically. Then I ratcheted up the temperature a little bit. Actually, before I get there, I want to say one thing. The conversation about when it's safe to exercise your rights is a really important conversation to have when you're discussing complicated topics like this. In your classroom, because we have that conversation with each other all the time. We all have rights and we have a conversation with ourselves about when it's safe to exercise those rights. And if we're having that conversation with ourselves or our colleagues or our family, we should also have it with our students if the context permits it. And I want to tell you a story about me. It's probably going to involve a cuss word around here, so I'm just going to give you a warning. Just to frame this, some things you might already know about me. I'm white, I'm male. You don't know this, but I'm going to tell you anyways. I'm a homeowner and I'm a loudmouth. I really get going sometimes. And I want you to keep this in mind as I tell you the story I'm about to tell you. It was like 2014 or so. I came home from Palomar, came home from work. It was a day where I was just doing office work. So I was dressed in jeans and a hoodie. And when I came in the house, I had my headphones on and my hoodie pulled up. I did not hear my neighbor say hi to me. And I closed my door. Apparently I slammed it. I don't realize that I did that, but I found out later that I slammed it, which alerted my neighbor that something was weird. So I was inside my house. I think I was doing something on my computer, playing a game or looking at Facebook or whatever. I was not working, but I was doing something, listening to my headphones. Unbeknownst to me, he was casing my house. He was walking around my house, looking in the windows, trying to see who had gotten into my house. It was me. He didn't know that. So he called the cops. And then probably 10 minutes later, I heard just knock, 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 loud knocking on the door. So I opened the door and step out, dumb, considering what I'm going to say later. That was a big mistake. I opened the door, walk out, and there's a cop on my patio, just amped to 10 with his hand on his gun. Who are you? Do you own this house? Geez, yeah. Let me go inside and get my ID. No, sit the fuck down. Okay. I reach over to get my patio chair to sit down. And he says, no, on the ground right now. And I just sit down in front of my door and just like freak, like what the hell is happening? And in that moment, I'm thinking, fuck this. This is my house. I am pissed. And I'm just ready to just go off. And then I stop and I think, this guy's got his hand on his gun and he is pissed and amped. I don't think that's the right move. I have the right to say it, but if I do, there's going to be probably a negative consequence that I don't want. So I didn't say anything. I just sat there. And then my neighbor came around the corner and was like, oh, Larry. I was like, dude, Lonnie, what is happening? He's like, oh, I thought you were an intruder. Dude, I am not what? And then everything just diffused. But in that moment, I had a conversation with myself. I know my rights, but what's safe to do in this situation? And in this context and other contexts that are similar, these conversations need to be had with students, so that in the moment and practice with students. So in the moment they can make a decision. I have a red card. It says it's my right to say, no, you can't come in. Is that the safe thing to do in that moment? And that's, I think, the moral thing to do with students during conversations like this, so that they know, okay, my teacher said this is my right, I'm going to do it. No, because it could be unsafe. And if we look at the current political climate right now, it might be less safe than at other times. So it's important to judge that. Okay, so we talked about rights in the classroom, and then I pivot to rights in the community, kind of just ratcheting up the scaffolding a little bit, ratcheting up the schema a little bit. Same task, same template. And students brought up things like I have the right to request services that I paid for, right? Like if I paid for my phone bill, my phone should work. I have the right to say my opinion. I have the right to drive on the road, to attend school. All of those rights came up, and we had that conversation again. When is it safe to exercise your rights? And in this case, I put a chart on the wall that had always, often, sometimes, rarely, never, obviously practicing adverbs of frequency, which is part of the course outline of record. So in that moment, bringing that language into the classroom as opposed to teaching it ahead of time in the place where the students needed it. And we ranked them. I always feel like I can drive on the road. I sometimes feel like I can say my opinion. I often attend school, unless there's someone on the road that will maybe stop me from going. So that was a fear as well. So having that just-in-time remediation for adverbs of frequency with this difficult conversation, but also ratcheting up the rights thing. Like it's, okay, classroom, and now it's community, and building up toward immigrant rights. So the cards that we had were rights or language from the ACLU for immigrants to know their rights, and specifically what to do when ICE comes to the house, a difficult, complicated topic that I felt morally I needed to discuss in the class and help students process that linguistically. And then kind of followed the same sequence though. Like we did some of the stuff together, we practiced, I modeled, we practiced, and then students did it in pairs, did some role plays. And for this task, because it was like, we're moving from like, oh, my classroom, that feels safe. My community feels safe. Boom, we're talking about ICE. I want out of this classroom. What's happening here? To try to twin that with something that felt rote and normal and safe, which was dialogues. We've all done dialogues. When I taught as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ukraine, if I didn't use dialogues, I got in trouble. Dialogues were the thing to do in the classroom. As much as I tried to fight against them, but dialogues do have some use. And I found the calming routine of them in this class, because our textbooks used a lot of them, was the key for this. And I want to dig into this activity more than the others. And I want to start here with language from the ACLU, which represents the materials that the students received. This is not the exact material, but the language did come from the ACLU. I just don't have those cards anymore. And again, that material for the students was in English and Spanish. This is only in English. But this slide shows the frame for how the rights discussion was framed for students, which is that you have guaranteed rights under the Constitution, and we're going to learn about those rights as an immigrant and how to express them safely. And just really quickly about the rights under the Constitution, I think people know this, but I just want to state this. The legal understanding is that the Constitution often uses the terms people and person, not necessarily citizen. And according to Christina Rodriguez, who is a Yale law professor, most provisions in the Constitution apply on the basis of personhood and jurisdiction in the United States and not necessarily on citizenship. So that's where the idea that immigrants have rights under the Constitution too. In practice, it's sometimes a different story. And I think more recently, we've seen the rights preserved along a spectrum, either yep, all the way or not. And that's a reality you have to bear in mind if you're having this specific difficult conversation in the classroom. Some of you came here and were thinking, wow, maybe we're talking about difficult conversations. I didn't know we were talking about ICE raids, but that's where we are. But this is applicable to tons of different difficult conversations as well. I hope, at least. So I want to move on to the specific focus of reducing risk. So when we started with this actual activity in the moment, what do you do? Just focused on 4 things with students before we got into any of the dialogue and the role plays, which was stay calm. If you can, that's really hard to do and hard to say. Don't lie. Just repeatedly got that into my students. Do not lie. Answer the questions truthfully. Be safe and keep the door closed. which is something that the ACLU recommends and the immigrant rights group recommended in this language and the cards that we were given and we gave students. It's something that I sure didn't think about in my situation. And if I had, it would have been a lot better situation because the police officer at my door would have understood I own the house before I open the door. I just kind of opened the door and rushed out because, I mean, I wasn't being very wise in that moment, I should say. So to draw on the schema that the students already bring to the classroom, something I did was define safety, but then moved into two general questions. How do you stay safe at home? Just in general, how do you stay safe at home? And then what do you do when someone rings your doorbell? The doorbell thing is important for me because as my wife and I were Peace Corps volunteers in Ukraine, the doorbell rang a lot, and it was people who were harassing us for being Americans, basically, and it like really set us on edge. So for the most part, when doorbell rings, we're very cautious. We kind of tiptoe to the door and look through the peephole and see who it is, or we just sit and don't make any noise. Apparently, unless it's a cop at my door and I just rush out the door, which is just, I'm not exactly sure why I did it in that time, but I did. So when we had this conversation, students said, how I stay safe in general is I be quiet, I don't bother people, I avoid conflict, and I stay away from bad people. And for the discussion about what happens when you ring the doorbell, some students said, I open the door and walk out. Like, oh yeah, me too sometimes. I use the window to see who it is, peek through the blinds, use the peephole, I ask who it is. They have a lot of different answers. These are just answers in general because the dialogue is going to be someone at the door and someone inside the house saying, can you please open the door? And I role played with students the simple action from the cards that says, keep the door closed. So can you open the door? Sorry, I can't. Can I help you? When you're looking at this, I didn't realize this. The blue lines are simply Microsoft Word suggesting things that I didn't notice when I took a screenshot. So please ignore the blue. But the bolded phrases and words are words that we focused on either before or after the lesson in terms of vocabulary development. But we just did this very simple dialogue so that in the moment, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, when I'm thinking about a situation and I'm like, oh yeah, I can logically, clearly go through that situation, and then it hits and you're just amped and everything goes out the window. So the more practice with this kind of dialogue, the better, because it just becomes routine, and that can help in the moment when you're just flooded with emotion. So we practiced this dialogue with students in the classroom. And then there was more language from the immigrant rights cards, the materials. And I'm putting some of it up here just to ask you this question. And again, you can write your answers in chat. What would you do in a beginning ESL, English language learning classroom with this material? And I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to a minute to type in the thing. Like, what would you do with this if you were teaching a beginning level class and had to do something with this? What would you do with some of this material? We've got role play, discuss the vocabulary, pair work, pictures, simplify the language. That's a really good idea. Make it accessible to your students in whatever way you can, depending on what level your students are at. Again, this was a high beginning class. I still needed to modify this myself, but this is some of the language they were getting in English, and then they had the Spanish translations. Have them create their own dialogue. Excellent, really good idea. A couple other ideas, something like practicing with imperatives, maybe cognitive activities, some vocabulary building with some of the more difficult words like warrant specifically, maybe work with conditional statements, even pronoun practice or making negative statements with do. Any of those types of things. You could do a lot with this as content, even with the assumption that maybe students won't understand everything, but it is a vehicle to practice a lot of the skills on your course outline of record. What I did with some of that material was some of what you said, a role play, expanded it, basically took the original dialogue and expanded it to include information about warrants, information about if the person is not on the warrant, you don't have to open the door, asking them to slide the warrant under the door, those types of things I included in the dialogue. We had discussions about those specific pieces of the language in that text because I felt that was the most relevant, and just gave students practice role playing. And again, I think a safe word is important because some students may be triggered by this because they've had this experience or they've had friends or colleagues or family members who have experienced this. So being sensitive and careful and really taking the temperature every day is important. I think also for my class, at least, this was not the entire day. This was probably a 25 to 30-minute lesson, and the rest was more quote unquote normal activities, things that were routine and kind of lowering the fear, the affective filter. So that is an example of something that I did, but there are also lots of different things you can do with this. Obviously, you can have different kinds of scenes with different types of warrants, with the name, without the name. Some of the things you mentioned in the chat already, which I think are really, really good ideas. Having students reflect on their feelings, I think is important. And then just practice some of the most important language until it feels routine, so students can do it in a calm way. But then again, come back to the question of when is it safe to exercise my rights? We took this material that you are being given and turned it into an English language lesson. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to use it if you don't feel safe doing that. So that we had that conversation repeatedly, just so students don't feel like, well, my teacher said I should do this, so I'm going to do it, and then something terrible happened. So it's up to us to provide the tools and to scaffold their use and explain when to use them, when to not. But students need to decide what's safe for them. They're the only ones who can decide that. I did not teach this online. This was 2017. I was teaching face-to-face. 2017 is a much different year than 2020. Just going to editorialize for a second. 2020 sort of sucks. But online learning is happening. And some of the things that I might do to approach this online, discussion threads or breakout rooms, Socrative, might use Padlet or video discussions. Interview neighbors about community rights, post some answers. Doing that safely, of course. I don't want people knocking on other people's doors. We're going to observe social distancing, for example. But some of these things I might do in an online environment. To be clear, I did not do that. I did not teach this online, and I'm not teaching this online currently, but this is something that maybe I would do. And then just to wrap up here, why discuss complicated issues in the ESL classroom? A lot of your answers in the chat kind of touch on these things. The thing that I want to focus on is the blue square. Just because their language skill is low doesn't mean that their capacity to understand complex topics is low. In fact, students might have more knowledge on this specific topic than I did. That was the case, in fact. So it was very useful and a learning experience for me as well. And then CAP principles work in lots of classes. They don't just work in the pre-transfer level accelerated courses. So if you walk out of here with anything, our students are complex people. They have complex emotions and thoughts. The complex content properly scaffolded is okay. You might want to modify, you might want to simplify, you might want to break it down in different ways. You are all experts in your classes. If I were to add all the years of experience all of us have in the classroom, it would be in the triple or quadruple digits. We know how to do this, and we know how to modify material to make it useful for our students and appropriate for different levels. For teaching complicated topics, I just hope we won't shy away from it. And just know that though this was a very, very complicated topic, you could have far less complicated topics and still approach it in a similar way, as long as we have high expectations and high support. And I will pass it over to Guillermo now.
Well, thank you, Lawrence. I will try to fit in the tail end here. I could have just gone on listening to Lawrence, actually, but it's my turn to present these slides. So my slides start with something that you've seen before. The CAP principles are over there, back on the left, and this time on the right, in order to introduce you to what I am doing actually right now, what my teachers are doing in class, the pedagogy that goes with it. The takeaway from this particular slide is that, in fact, we apply the CAP principles to every stage of our planning for the classes and every stage that we actually practice the classes. We do believe that they do apply, and hopefully I will show you how we actually end up doing that. So I'll go, next slide, please. I don't have control, by the way, so when you hear me say next slide, you know, they control me. That's exactly how my wife likes it too. So themes and goals. This is what we're doing at this particular level, level 1, this semester. And the theme is racial prejudice towards foreign immigrants, you know, trying to hit home with something, and community micro and macro aggressions today. basically trying to get across the fact that, racism is not always done by obvious bad, evil people. Sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes it's so built in, and good people can come out with things that are bad. How do you react to them? What I want to get across in my particular part of the talk is the fact that, for the answer of why should we even approach complex ideas or even controversial ideas, even in a low-level classroom, there's another reason besides the fact that they are complex people and they can understand this. And that reason is we want to stir them. We want to stir their emotions. We also, at the same time, want to be able to increase their confidence so that they will want to express opinions and be understood in writing and speaking, and their opinions about the characters and people involved and how they apply to us. And more importantly, to express possible solutions for how they would handle such a thing as racism. This, I have found, leads to even quicker acquisition of language when they're actually talking and writing about something that matters. So that's another reason not to avoid complex issues, but actually seek them out. And we'll go ahead to the next slide. I was convinced to put this slide in here, guys. Actually, Lauren suggested I should start at the end because as you take them to the beginning, and I promise I will come back to the beginning of a semester, how they are writing and what they're doing. But I did want to show you guys after 16 weeks, these are our beginning level students. This is how they are writing at the end. I wanted to show you this because most people see this as rather unbelievable. To be quite honest, I couldn't believe it the first time I saw it, and I helped create it. So this just goes, it talks to the point that the beginning students, even the so-called, absolute beginning students, they have always been underrated. They have always been underestimated as to what they can do. And a little later on, I'll have you a story as what I mean by that. But that's the end. I promise that I will come back to the beginning to show you. So let's leave the end now and go one by one, the CAP principles and how reflected. Now remember, we're actually doing this particular issue right now, so it's all online. So I'm going to happen to give you how we've adapted it for online. So each of these things will have a particular practice that comes from our Canvas container from things, but the key, one of the keys, the first principle, relevant thinking-oriented curriculum. The choice of text. We have gotten rid of all our normal traditional texts and used instead novels and books. At this particular level, we choose a book that's about elementary level things. And before I actually get to the next slide, I just want to throw out a name of one of my heroes, which is Stephen Krashen, because I always refer to him. Stephen Krashen now says that the key to language acquisition, he's not talking about ESL particularly, but just language acquisition in general, is optimum input. And he claims optimum input becomes the best from reading. So for us here at Cuyamaca, reading is the basis of the input, most of the basis, okay? Here's the text that we are using. It's basically a juvenile novel called Wish Tree by Catherine Applegate. And if we can go to the next slide that shows you the back end of the book, it has the description there, okay? And basically, the takeaway that I want you guys to, from this slide is the fact that the very question that we're asking about ESL students, how can we possibly approach, complex issues with people who are limited in the language, in the scope, even from true beginners to, in this case, I'm really about to show you what we call the false beginners. Somewhere they can write some things, but definitely not a whole bunch of things, okay? How can we actually do that? I want to point out that the fact that when you're talking about children, it's a very similar question has been asked, and the authors have figured that out long ago. This example, Wish Tree, is about racism and community reactions and community responsibilities, which is a very heavy thing for a fifth grader, sixth grader. I understand they sometimes use this in fourth grade as well. But authors have been doing that a while back. They simply use the power of story and the kind of stories that that are appropriate for a lower kind of understanding to introduce that higher level complex ideas. And that's exactly what we are doing here in using Wish Tree. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how do we get the low-level students to even understand even the simple story of what's happening in a book like Wish Tree? So this is taken from one of our actual exercises right now in the Canvas container when we're online. And you'll see that we actually introduce them to taking notes and actually annotation. We don't call it annotation right from the start. We do that later once they're already doing it. These, as you can read, are suggestions of what to do as you read the story. In addition, you see this guy holding the book at the end. I won't bother to actually play the video because we don't really have time. But this particular person has read the entire book Wish Tree out loud on the internet, and it's made available, like 3 chapters at a time. And we have them, actually, we've embedded this into our Canvas containers so that they can listen to it as they read it and as they do what we suggest at the bottom, putting star next to ideas, circling new words, and we'll be checking all this, you'll see in the next slide. But hearing as they read, and they can of course go back to hear it again. And before we move on, quick word about copyright. Oops, yeah, let's not do that. Quick word about copyright. So some of you might be wondering, well, wait a minute, doesn't this kind of, if they can just hear it all online, that kind of cheats the author out of things, right? Well, no, remember, we require them to buy the book because of things that they have to do will use the book, as you're about to see. So everybody already has the book, so we don't cheat the author out of anything. And we're quite covered on the copyright front. Okay, so they're reading this book with complex ideas, and they're being helped all the way to it. And then we check them a little bit. That's the next slide. They take shots. We encourage them. We ask them. He says, this is your book, and we're going to share it with you, but you need to write in your book. And these are the kind of things that we want to see written in the book. And this is the kind of picture we want you to take of your books and send it to us through Canvas so that we can check that, in fact, you are actually interacting with the book as we proceed with our instructions. And this is basically how we have introduced the whole idea of annotation with them to get the ideas along. Remember, the book starts off as a very simple sort of fantasy story. It's a talking tree. It talks with the animals. It's a wish tree, which means that people traditionally come, put wishes on a piece of paper, tie it to the tree, and then somehow the wish is supposed to come true. So this is all very low key, low stakes, and little by little, the complex issues are introduced. So as they're taking in all of these words and all of these new ideas, they are going to be introduced with something that demands more critical thinking. Okay, all right, next. I'm trying to be mindful of time to give you guys a lot of time to question. The next thing we have is the low stakes collaborative practice. What I want to say about this is that I have particularly found this particular principle to be the absolute key and what makes our program work. It is the group work, the things that we do together, and all the collaborative practice. You see a list of these things that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Character charts in a group, speed dating, where you basically have the conga lines discussing questions, jigsaw activities, debates, circles, poster creations, where you have a gallery walk going around, surveys. All of these things work wonders to get the students to break down what they read, what they thought they read, and to make actual meaning from the things so they can understand, grasp the story, and then grasp the ideas. Now, I am going to be the first one to admit that this works extremely well in the face-to-face classroom. And it's quite challenging to duplicate this in a remote setting. It really, really is. Well, we've done the best we can, but we're anxious to go face-to-face again because this really works great, but face-to-face. But it does work to an extent when it's not face-to-face. And let's see if we can show you. The next slide. Okay. So we're familiar with the discussion aspect in that we see in Canvas. And these are the kind of discussion questions. Now this would be in the middle of the semester. I'm privy to having, you know, the entire semester's worth that we're doing now, even though we're not to some of these chapters yet in our real classrooms. But here is when we're trying to get them to focus on character and character traits and what's happening to one of the lead characters with Samar. And Samar is the girl from the Middle East whose family moves into the neighborhood and encounters prejudice. So getting the idea to talk about Samar and identify with her is one of the things that this discussion helps do. Notice that it is still pretty low stakes. And the peer interaction makes it much more comfortable for them. Okay. Already at this particular point, what's coming out in the comments from the students is exactly what we want to see. It's the critical thinking about, you know, country. I think she is lonely. I think she is scared. I think that she believes people don't want her. It's exactly the kind of issues that we want them to come up with themselves. And it happens right about here, where we go from the nice, easy fantasy to the more complex issues that actually come out. Okay. All right, next slide. Now, even in quizzes, this particular slide is just so you recognize, it's when you have a quiz on Canvas, this is what it looks like, right? And you set the points and you set the questions, so we all see this, right? But you see where that arrow is, and I'm just going to ask Lawrence to take us to the next slide because I just want you to zoom in on that particular question down at the bottom. For all my teachers, it's very important that we are gentle with the students all the way, every single time. So here in the middle of doing a quiz where we're actually measuring something that they either know or don't know, comes on page 12. We can see many different, referring them back, you can open book, you open right back to the story, right back to the words that are very, very important, and says, what would you wish to write down? Getting them to engage being part of the fantasy themselves. No right or right answer, it's a freebie, and we think this is very important, even when we do our quizzes. And by the way, our quizzes, they can retake until they get the score that they want. Tests, not so much, but quizzes, yes. And this is another way to make sure that, that they're being engaged in a non-threatening kind of way, okay? So I just wanted to show you that it's even there in the questions. All right, the next slide. I know I'm zipping through this, but you know, when I get to doing my stories, I want to be able to take time to do it, right? So the next principle, intentional support for students' affective needs. We all have been trained about students' affective needs. We all went through the same kind of things as ESL teachers. I have noticed that many of the things that that we learned, that I learned, when we get out to the real world, we're kind of forced to, well, here's the textbook, here's the thing, here's what you do, and a lot of the things that we learn seem to go out the window. Not so when we apply these CAP principles. Everything that that I was taught, all the other principles that were taught about teaching language have come back right into play. So about the students' affective needs, it's basically all about reducing the fear. And a key word that I have for that is contact. A brief story. When I looked up the word communication long back, I found that it has the same root as the word to touch. That's what communication is primarily. Well, I used to actually say and give a talk where I say, you know, it's our job as teachers to touch the students. Well, I immediately stopped saying that because, of course, it's the wrong kind of context and you don't want to actually go that way. But it is all about contact with the students and constant contact, constant feedback. The more the student sees you, the more that you actually are there to interact with them, the more confidence they have and the more they tend to grasp these complex ideas that we're trying to get across to them. Okay, some examples should be coming up. So I'll go to the next slide. Okay. Here's something that I have in my Canvas container now, and I copied it from several of my teachers. I don't want to give you the impression that I created everything all myself. I created an idea, and then I stole from the rest of my teachers who created the real work of what's happened in our containers. So here's an open discussion that is posted at the beginning of our course, and it stays open through the entire course. And the idea that at any time they can come and ask any question about the course, about the technology, about anything, and I monitor this and answer. It is open for all to read and all to read for the answers as well. So an open discussion is one way to alleviate fears. I also have the policy that they can email me at any time. I will answer within 24 hours. And I also have open Zoom hours that they can come and see me. Anytime that there is actual contact with the students, helps their confidence in what we are talking about. Right? So you see that up at the top. The complexity of students with lower level language skills requires constant accessibility to the instructor. And that is key. And it is a trick right now. It really is a trick during COVID times. It is easier when they see you face to face in that classroom and you're part of the activities, but it can still be done that way. Okay, next. Now here's a discussion. I actually zoomed you back towards the beginning of the course before the story itself gets into the serious things that happen. Here's an idea. One of my colleagues has a discussion where they are to describe themselves. What animal are you going to be similar to? Remember, it's a book that starts out with a talking tree and talking animals that talk to each other. And we want them to engage in the story and just basically play along with the fantasy. When the story comes to the part where a mysterious boy comes and carves a hate word on the tree, and the tree is right in front of the yard of the new immigrants that have moved in, it's a little more shocking to everybody. And if you've already kind of pretended in your mind that you're part of the story, engaged in some of the story, it actually helps get that particular shock across. It's the author's intention, we believe, and it works really well to convey the ideas that we're about to do. Okay, so that's another discussion example. There was a lot of examples that were just discussions. It's the main thing, but you can also do wiki pages. You can also bring in other things into the Canvas container. We tried to make it as easy as possible this time around during COVID-19. But this is just some of the ways that we basically put the exercises as best we could on a remote setting. Okay.
20 minutes, Guillermo.
Yes.
Oh, it's 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Oh,
20.
Thank you. Okay. Next. This one I put in there. It is not the whole thing because that would be kind of boring. It's too much for this things. But you guys would recognize part of this is the kind of rubrics that they have on Canvas right now. This is how I'm grading your submission kind of thing. I want you guys to notice the language because usually it's you either did it or you didn't do it. You get the point or you don't get the point. But the language that my teachers use is stuff like "great job," "paragraph looks well typed, is good," or not yet. They're very gentle. Even the language in the rubrics that they see is gentle, and that is very, very important. It is especially important to the beginner students, I think. We don't want to scare them at any particular time. So even in the language of the rubrics that we have in there, we're gentle as they go through. Okay, next. Okay, a word about just-in-time remediation, and a brief story. It wasn't our department, the ESL, but in our English department, when they also applied the acceleration principles, and they utilized a lot that we call the just-in-time remediation. And this is basically bringing up very technical, sometimes, most of the time, grammatical points to a classroom as the issue actually comes up when they're doing the actual assignments. So when it's needed, that's when the teacher takes time to explain, and it usually is initiated by the students themselves. Well, the complaint that came from people that were resistant to this went something like this. So, are they supposed to learn by magic? This was actually what they said. They're supposed to learn by magic. If we don't show them at the beginning, how in the world are they supposed to just kind of get this? Now remember, this is ignoring the, Stephen Krashen's whole premise. They are getting lots of things that you don't even know they're getting just from the readings that they're doing and then trying to comprehend, just in the trying to comprehend the readings. Not that they're understanding 100%, even 90%, even 80%, whatever a lot of it is they're getting things. But there is a story from one of my colleagues. It wasn't at this school. It was more in the Bay Area. That really hit home when I heard her talk about this. And it was this. My colleague believed that she was doing right in preparing the students for their writings with whatever text that they are writing or researching. And she would prepare them as how to write. She would prepare for the grammatical structures that they're going to encounter in the reading and they're needed. And she would take a lot of time in this preparation. And then they would have the essay assignments and the essays would come in. And they were typical as essays that we've all received. And the idea of not doing the kind of preparation that she did horrified her, because she could just, what kind of essays would I get if I didn't do this and prepare them ahead of time? Well, very, very bravely, she actually experimented one semester. And she actually did all her explanations in the just-in-time remediation manner. She waited till they came up during the actual work and assignments, and then explained very quickly in that sense, rather than having all the preparation, the front loading ahead of time. And then came the essay. And she just stood back biting her nails and says, what kind of essays am I going to get? She says she was astounded that she got exactly the same type of essays that she was getting before. She said, I saw no difference whatsoever in what was doing. The takeaway from that is that what she thought was instantly translating into the essays was not instantly translating. Something else was going on. The benefit of doing the just-in-time, she said, I was able to cover a lot more material, and they did seem to get it. So there's all sorts of things out there to show that just-in-time remediation is very, very worthwhile to go about. And the preparation that a lot of us do might not actually be translating like we think it does. So that's how we do it here. Okay. Next slide is going to go into the last point. So remember, I promised you that I would get to the point in the talk that I would return to the beginning of the semester, right? You remember where I showed you what they were writing like after 16 weeks. And right about in this particular topic, I'm promised I will show you the beginning. So backwards design from next level courses. I've got to tell you that I'm going to call it the marriage of acceleration and English language acquisition is an odd couple. The California Acceleration Principles really was developed, and the idea primarily was for English and math. And the underlying idea is to remove the remediation courses and put them straight into transfer level, with co-requisites and other techniques. ESL is a different matter. ESL is not remediation. I mean, it has been officially recognized. It's not remediation, but we do recognize that if you do not have enough of the English language, you will not be able to succeed in the transfer level course. So there is a need to have, instruction before going in there. However, I think it has been assumed all this time that a lot more preparation is needed than actually is needed. And the students have been underestimated as to how quickly they can acquire things if the atmosphere is correct. And that's what we try to do. Okay, so on the next slide, this is where I start to slow down. Here's the entry level. A typical entry level at top, the cutoff of entry level. Anything better than this, and it's not the entry level for us. So you can see this is not exactly the 0 level. This is not the true beginner. We're working on a true beginner class, but we're thinking the principles still apply. So when you see this and you try to remember the, what I showed you at the beginning, we're talking about the same students after 16 weeks. And now I ask your patience as I go into a story from here. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go back in the Wayback Machine of my mind about, I was about to say 35 years, but it's 45. I mean, it's 45 years. We're going to go back to high school, okay? High school for me. And we're going to go back to high school basketball and our basketball team in high school. I loved basketball. I loved playing basketball. And the only problem with that was that I was not really very good. I was not that coordinated. I was not that consistent. I was one of these guys that loved the game, but let's pick him last kind of thing. Okay. Well, like all of my friends, I tried out for the basketball team as soon as I got into high school. Now, the basketball coach at our high school, way back, was decent, was good, had some fairly good teams, no championships to speak of, but he ran his tryouts pretty much the same way as everybody else. And the tryouts were do the drills, see if you can, how many shots can you make out of 10, how many layups can you make, drills back and forth, while the coach rated you. And at the end, either you made it or you didn't make it. Okay, so this is basically the deficit model in high school basketball coaching. You got to a certain point where you can't do that. That defines what you can do. And we're looking for people this level to go in. Okay. When we went into high school, we got a new basketball coach, and he did things a slightly different way. It's the same kind of drills that he had, but the tryouts. I remember we had all my friends and myself were in there, and I'll tell you right now, I didn't make it. It's okay. I'm over it. But the tryouts were similar in that there were drills, and then there was a lot of 3-on-3, 4-on-4 little pickup games while the coach walked around. But the big difference was that this happened after school during the evening, and it was a special invite that came out to the families of all these people going out. All the families were there, and especially the parents. And there were treats and snacks to make sure that the parents would come. So while everybody was trying out on the courts, the parents were in the stands. The coach walked around and took notes, and then he would go up in the stands and talk to the parents, and then he'd come back. And it didn't seem like he was paying as much attention as the old coach would have done. But afterwards, in a couple days, they decided who was on the team and who wasn't. Now, my friend Paul, who was a bit better than I was, but not that much better, And we were roughly, you know, the same height. He was a little bit better. And he made the team where I didn't. And, you know, some people I thought that were, that I was actually a little better than, you know, might have made the team. And it seemed kind of weird to me how it happened, but Paul made the team. So flash forward now, and we'll flash forward to 2 years later. And suddenly our high school has a championship basketball team. My friend Paul is the starting center of that team. Now, what had happened in 2 years is my friend Paul, his height changed. He shot up some incredible 8-9 inches, something like that. And he towered over me, whereas we were pretty much even beforehand. And he continued working hard, and he was star of the game. When it came to the time of our graduation, I remember Paul asked his coach a question, and I heard about it. I never connected this until much, much later, now, as a matter of fact. He asked him, "Coach, why did you choose me all that time? I didn't think I was all that good." And this is what the coach said. Coach said, "I like the way you hustle. You kept running even after you missed a shot. And you kept running as fast as you could, and you kept trying. But son," this was the way he done, "but son, what I really liked is I spoke to your parents in the stand, and they were both tall." Now, this was the coach that looked for capacity and not the deficit. So now I'm going to take you back to the slide that's in front of you. I now see in these little, you know, tryouts that are happening here for the class, yeah, what strikes me is that they kind of sort of looked like paragraphs without having the right structure. They kind of sort of look like, you know, paragraphs that can be developed. I think that these particular examples show tall parents. That's what I'm thinking. And we're going to put them in to a very challenging, the very challenging curriculum, as well as the very challenging issues that we have there, and see how they do. Now let's go ahead and go to the next slide and see, wrap it up. Now, I apologize, but the rest is 2 slides. And it's 2 slides because I couldn't get it all in. Normally, after 16 weeks, they would have 1 paragraph to do. Remember, this is 4 semesters away from actually going into the transfer level English. But this is what they did, and a lot of them in many of our classes did not 1 paragraph, but 2 paragraphs. Notice that they have citations because we asked them to try, and they did it, and they did it correctly. There's lots of errors still. This is a B paper. This is a B paper after 16 weeks. From the start that you saw, this is what they were doing. This is, you know, what they have afterwards. If we can slide to the next, the second slide, so you can see the end of this essay. Oops, I think Lawrence, you know, wandered away maybe. But the next slide shows the conclusion of these papers, and it does show a conclusion. It has the words of a conclusion. Everything is in there. Basically, it needs refining, but they've come a long, long way. So I have seen for myself just how easy it is. Oh, someone's in there. So if you can move to the next slide, if possible. Okay, I didn't realize that was the next slide.
5 minutes, Guillermo.
That guy, okay. Thanks. I think I'm gonna beat the time on this one. That's the end of the essay right there. So the kind of growth, you can see this is the kind of growth that just like my friend Paul, who shot up, you know, almost a foot in the high school. This is the kind of growth that our students are capable of doing. These guys are capable of doing. This was not exceptional. Like I said, this was just the B paper. We see this consistently in our courses that start out with beginners. This is how our beginners end up. And I think part of the reason this is because they tackle hard issues. They tackle issues that they have to engage in order to be able to do this thing. They think about it. they contribute, they want to contribute. That's what we need for them to have this kind of growth coming in there. Okay. The last slide is just to share with you everything we did this semester on our Canvas. Basically all our online curriculum is available in the Canvas Commons. This is what they're listed under. If you just go Cuyamaca ESL, you will see them. They are, of course, free for anybody to take and adapt however they like. There's a lot more exercises that we have in there converted. All you need is an empty container to put them in, and you can see it all for yourself. It's 16 weeks worth of assignments, schedule, quizzes, tests, all these things with notes for the teacher. It's all in there. Beyond that, each of our levels also have that face-to-face curriculum. We have 4 semesters worth for level 1, level 2, and level 3. Also all available to anybody for the asking. We were paid to do it as a grant, and we've done 4 semesters worth. And that's how we incorporate these things. So you see, the complex issues is not just something that we're able to do, it's something that we have to do. It is part of what we do to get the students to actually grow. And that takes me to the end of my talk, which means it's back to summer.
Thank you both so very much. That was really great. We're going to open up the chat for questions. So go ahead and type any questions. I saw one that came up earlier, I believe during Guillermo's presentation. Can you share how you have adapted some of those low stakes activities for the online format?
Absolutely, but they're actually right there in what I shared, where you can go into Canvas and see it for yourselves. There's a lot of different teachers doing the adaptations there, and they're all available. You see it for all of our levels, and each one of these things are there. Each one of our adaptations are there, and they're pretty completely thought out. And of course, anybody can adapt it and change it to however they like. But they are there and they are available. There's just so many to pick out one right now. I can just tell you that one of the things we've done for online for COVID is that when it comes to quizzes, in my classes, they can retake quizzes as often as they like until they get the score they want. Because we think that the quizzes is just an opportunity to learn rather than an opportunity to measure. But it's available to everybody right there.
There was a question about where are these accessible. I think you answered that. They're all in Canvas Commons.
The Canvas
so
Commons.
Search them there. Are the high beginner classes asynchronous or synchronous on Zoom?
Is that for me too?
I believe so. Yeah, since you were talking about this semester, I think Lawrence was more focused on prior to online.
You know, it's quite a controversy about that. So they're going to require us to have synchronous and requiring it. And we, of course, object to a requirement during this time of doing these things. But it's all have to do with how they are coding the attendance for these things. So what we actually have now, and what I think works best, is we have Zoom classes that are check-ins. They are optional for the students right now. All of the actual work that's being done in the containers, Canvas containers at home, that we're constantly on top of. It's not like it's easier for the teacher. Instead of being on 2-3 times a week for X amount of hours, we're actually on 24/7, always answering emails. I have answered emails that I get from students on Sunday, on Saturday night, on Friday nights. We're on more time than ever. Those Zooms are right now check-ins, and people do check in, and we do go through. I never go more than an hour and 15 minutes. That's a long, long time for a Zoom and myself. I don't recommend anybody to do that, and from everything I've read, nobody else does either. But the requirements of how much Zoom to have is a problem of, you have to work it out with your school and your administration. However, best practice shows that you don't want to rely on Zoom to get your lessons across. online is online, and there are online best practices.
And for ours, they are optional Zoom courses. So everything is housed in Canvas, all the material. And then the optional but super highly encouraged synchronous part where the Zoom sessions where the students are doing the breakout rooms and reviewing the material. And that happens 2 or 3 times a week, I believe, for our high beginner classes.
And I think that's the best. I think that's the best way to do it.
One question you were asked, Guillermo, could you speak a little bit to this structure of your courses, about your integrated class and kind of roughly how much time students are spending on writing, grammar, reading, et cetera, in that integrated class?
The class, it's actually the slide that you guys asked me to take out, but it had to do with the fact that we follow the instructional cycle. So basically, it is all based on a reading, a real book reading, and then we have activities. We do not use any other, a grammar book or anything like that. We have activities based on the readings, and we actually have a grammar companion course, but the grammar is also based on what they're reading in the books that they're doing. So it goes, reading, breakout of the meaning of the reading, some comprehension check of the reading, then some exercises to come up with an idea of what to write about the reading, some actual practice writing about the reading, and then it happens all over again. And we follow this cycle roughly 3 times in a semester, whereas basically the reading, the breaking down of meaning of the reading, figuring out what you're going to write about connected to the reading, practicing that, having people help you revise it, and then doing it again and doing it again in major things. Offhand, just without the things in front of me, that's how I can explain it at this particular point. When you have, if you want, anybody that wants to email me and ask for these things, the curriculum is really, really spelled out as to how it is broken down and what follows what and what follows when. I don't feel it's well answered. I'm so sorry about that, but as soon as I said take that slide out, I thought I was safe. Okay.
No, that was perfect. It was just a question in the chat that someone had about wanting to know if the courses were integrated courses and kind of a breakdown of how much time is spent there. Yeah.
That's the question I should have. Yes, they're very much integrated. They do everything all at once. Yes.
There's a question asking how you achieve all the group work needed in an asynchronous class in reading, writing for high beginners. I think maybe for both Guillermo and Lawrence.
Yeah, Lawrence, you want to take that?
For me, the key is, did you say was the question asynchronous and synchronous or just asynchronous?
How do you achieve the group work needed in an asynchronous class in reading and writing for high beginners?
Right. So one thing that I like to do, and my wife does as well, I'm watching her do it, is having different discussion boards, right? Putting students into groups into discussion boards on the Canvas so they can have those discussions there, but also leaving up different Zoom rooms that just put the link up and they can go in whenever they want to, or they can sign up for times and they can go in together and do work together. Usually in a shared Google document. That's where the writing usually happens. So providing a virtual space where the students can join in a way that they're used to, which is usually Zoom, giving them the link, and then those students can go in on a schedule, or they might have their own Zoom link, and you don't have to be there. You just set it up, and then they can come in without you being there, and then they can use that space to do their work together. Those are 2 ways that I've either done or seen done.
We do something very similar. There's one extra thing that we do that we tried out this time, and that is the creation. Now, it hasn't actually happened at the beginning level, but the creation of a wiki page, which is a resource for when it's time for them to write. Everybody can contribute to the wiki page, basically, character traits. Things like that, quotes from the book that show character traits. And they basically are helping each other on this big wiki page that they're all available to and they can add to. And when it comes time to write, they can refer to that to help them get the ideas and refine things. So there are actually various methods that they can do to have the students actually get on top of the work themselves and for you to check them.
Yeah, now you look like a real ninja.
What's that?
Laura, I see Lori has her hand up. Lori Woods.
Hello. I'm going to tell Guillermo, correct Guillermo, and tell him that the low level has wiki pages
Oh, okay.
to collaborate on, also finding adjectives and matching quotes to describe their characters.
Lori is the author of several of the pages you saw today. She is one of the stars of the program. We have several of our teachers here. So by all means, correct me all the time. You know me well enough that knows that I need correcting all the time. So that is fine.
There was a question I missed earlier. How many hours of weekly instruction do students receive in the writing course, in the grammar course? Are they integrated?
I think this one is for me. We have a grammar companion that goes with our integrated reading writing course. At least it looks like that on the books. So it is the reading writing course is a 6-hour course, and the grammar companion course is a 3-hour course per week. But we stipulate that the grammar course basically has them do similar sort of exercises that they do in the reading writing course. They're using the exact same book. There's no extra grammar book or anything. They're doing activities focused on grammar from what they are reading at the time. So it is completely integrated. Both of the curriculums are done at the same time. Depending on the book we're using, that's the particular curriculum that goes with the grammar things. So they actually merge together. Very, very integrated in that way. The grammar is there to support the reading writing course.
Lori, is your hand up again to correct Guillermo again? Or just still?
Yes, Lori.
I think maybe it might just still
No,
be up.
no, I pressed it a bunch of times last time. Sorry.
Okay. A question here. Do you offer lab time for the writing component?
We don't have a lab existing right now. We do have lab normally. In fact, we've tried to model our lab as best as possible from Summer's school, Irvine Valley College, and the people there. Lawrence, you guys have a lab, don't you?
It's the tutoring center. We have a tutoring center where students go in and get writing support, and that's still available virtually.
And ours is as well. We have a writing center that's been available virtually, staffed with faculty.
Yeah, unfortunately, we do have a virtual tutoring center as well, but our actual lab that we had to help along with the classes, that is not a virtual right now. We just don't have it during this COVID times.
And then just at Palomar, in terms of the English side, they do have a writing center, and that's doing virtual work as well. But in terms of ESL specifically, it's the tutoring center.
Yeah, and just to add on, at Irvine Valley, we have two. We have an ESL center, and then we have a writing center. And then we also have transfer level classes with ESL co-recs, and we have ESL instructors in our English writing center to help with those classes as well. I think that wraps up our question. Anyone else have anything they wanted to add? Well, thank you all for being here. This is great to see such a big group on a Friday afternoon. As I mentioned in the beginning, this will be available on the CAP website on the publications page, and I will send you guys a link after this is over, along with a follow-up survey link, which is really helpful for us. Our next webinar, the final in our series of 4, is going to be with Rebecca Beck from Irvine Valley and Dwayne Leonard from Sacramento City, and they will be talking about transfer level ESL courses. The class I actually just mentioned at my college, that is a transfer level with an ESL co-rec. So they'll be sharing how those programs work at their college, and then also sharing classroom samples to provide a window into the classroom. So that's on November 13th. If you haven't registered already, you can use the same link as this one. And thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate it, and have a great weekend.